The cold wind cut through the city streets like a warning as the last night of the year pressed down on everyone who had nowhere special to go, and Emily Carter stood under flickering streetlights realizing she had exactly $3 in her coat pocket and a heart full of fragile hope that might not survive the night. Before the story unfolds any further, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and quiet miracles that show up when life feels empty, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your support keeps stories like this alive. Emily had not imagined her New Year's Eve would begin this way. She had spent most of her adult life surviving instead of living, learning how to stretch pennies, hide disappointments behind polite smiles, and convince herself that wanting more was dangerous. At 32, she worked 2 part-time jobs, one at a local bakery in the mornings and another cleaning offices at night. Her life had been a careful balance of exhaustion and gratitude that she could pay rent on her tiny studio apartment, gratitude that she had her health, gratitude that she was still standing. But somewhere deep inside, she carried a quiet loneliness that grew louder every time the year ended and the city erupted into celebration. She had met Daniel Brooks 3 weeks earlier when she accidentally spilled coffee on his coat at the bakery. He had laughed instead of scowling, helped her clean up the mess, and stayed longer than necessary, talking about small, ordinary things that somehow felt important. Daniel was a single father to triplet daughters, a fact he mentioned with a tired pride that made Emily smile. He worked as a mechanic, lived modestly, and had eyes that showed he had been through more than he talked about. When he asked her to go out with him on New Year's Eve, Emily hesitated. She knew what dates cost. She knew what she had in her bank account. But she also knew how rare it felt to be seen, and she said yes before fear could stop her. By the time New Year's Eve arrived, reality caught up to her. After paying rent and utilities, after buying groceries that would last just long enough, she checked her wallet and found $3 lonely folded into a corner. She sat on the edge of her bed staring at the number as if it might change out of pity. Canceling felt safer. Disappearing was something she was good at. But something about Daniel's gentle optimism, about the way he talked about his daughters as if they were the center of his universe, made her put on her coat and step outside anyway. The restaurant Daniel chose was not fancy, but it glowed warmly against the cold night, windows fogged with laughter and clinking glasses. Emily's stomach tightened as she walked in, already calculating how she could get through the evening without ordering much, how she could hide her embarrassment. She told herself it was just dinner, just a few hours, just another thing to endure. Daniel arrived with an apology written all over his face, explaining that his daughters insisted on coming along first to drop something off. Emily did not fully understand what he meant until the door opened again and 3 identical girls stepped inside, bundled in colorful coats, their eyes bright with excitement. Lily, Grace, and Hope were 10 years old, full of energy, and immediately filled the space with a warmth that made Emily forget the cold and her fear, if only for a moment. The girls were everything Daniel had described and more. They moved like a small team, whispering to each other, observing Emily with curiosity and kindness that felt disarming. Emily felt suddenly exposed, as if children had a way of seeing through the careful walls adults built. She smiled and tried to be present, reminding herself that this night was not about money, but about connection. As the evening unfolded, Emily's anxiety returned in quiet waves. The menu felt heavy in her hands. Every price looked like a mistake waiting to happen. She ordered the simplest thing she could, barely touching it, afraid of enjoying too much. She laughed at the right moments, listened carefully, and tried not to let her fear show. The countdown to midnight loomed, and with it, the bill she did not know how to face. What Emily did not know was that Lily, Grace, and Hope had been watching her too. They noticed how she pushed food around her plate. They noticed the way her smile sometimes faltered. They noticed the nervous way she folded and unfolded her napkin. Children often understand more than adults realize, especially children who had grown up watching their father stretch himself thin to give them everything he could. Earlier that day, the girls had pooled together their allowance and the money they earned helping neighbors shovel snow. They had planned to surprise their father with something small but meaningful, a New Year's Eve treat to thank him for being both mom and dad, for never missing a school event even when he was exhausted, for loving them fiercely in a world that had not been gentle to them. When they realized Emily would be part of the night, their plan quietly expanded. As midnight approached, the restaurant lights dimmed slightly, and the hum of conversation grew louder. Emily felt the familiar weight of loneliness creep back in, sharper now because she had let herself hope. She excused herself to the restroom, locked herself into a stall, and pressed her forehead against the cool metal, trying to steady her breathing. $3 felt like an accusation. It told her she did not belong here, that she was pretending at a life she could not afford. When she returned to the table, something had shifted. The girls were beaming with excitement they could barely contain. Daniel looked confused but amused, watching them whisper urgently to a server. Before Emily could ask what was happening, the server returned with a small cake topped with sparklers, lighting up the table in golden flickers. Emily froze, her heart racing for a reason that had nothing to do with fear this time. The cake was simple, but it felt like a miracle. The girls watched her closely, eyes shining, waiting to see her reaction. In that moment, Emily understood. She understood that this was not about a cake or a bill or money at all. It was about being included. It was about being seen and chosen, even when you had nothing to offer. The sparklers burned down as the room counted toward midnight, and Emily felt something inside her crack open. She had spent so long believing she was a burden, that she needed to earn her place in the world through quiet suffering. Here were 3 children, giving without calculation, reminding her that kindness did not ask for permission. When the bill came, Daniel reached for it instinctively, but the girls were already one step ahead. They proudly explained their plan, their small hands clutching an envelope they had prepared. Daniel's eyes filled with tears as realization washed over him. Emily's breath caught as she watched a man who had given everything he had learned that he was not alone, that love had a way of multiplying itself. Outside, fireworks began to bloom across the sky, bursts of color reflected in icy streets. Emily stepped out into the cold night feeling lighter than she had in years. The city no longer felt indifferent. It felt alive, generous, full of possibility. Daniel walked beside her, his daughters dancing ahead, their laughter echoing like a promise. They did not talk about money or struggles or fear. They talked about ordinary dreams. Emily listened as the girls shared what they wanted the new year to bring, and she realized she was smiling without effort. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to imagine a future that did not revolve around survival alone. In the weeks that followed, Emily's life did not magically become easy. Bills still came. Work was still exhausting. But something fundamental had changed. She began to accept help when it was offered. She allowed herself to hope without immediately apologizing for it. Daniel and his daughters became a quiet, steady presence in her life, reminding her that family was not always something you were born into, but something you built through care and courage. On nights when the world felt heavy again, Emily remembered the sparklers, the small hands clutching an envelope, the way kindness had found her when she had only $3 and no expectations left. She remembered that sometimes, the most important gifts arrived disguised as ordinary moments, and that love often showed up through people who had every reason to hold back but chose not to. If this story is reaching you during a hard season, if you feel like you are standing under flickering streetlights with very little left to give, remember this. You are not invisible. You are not unworthy. And sometimes, the people who change our lives are the ones who notice our quiet struggles and step in without being asked. Please comment if this story reminded you that small acts of kindness can change everything. As this story comes to an end, if it touched your heart even a little, if it reminded you of hope, family, or the power of compassion, please like the video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to the channel. Your engagement helps spread stories that matter, and sometimes, that is how another miracle begins.